It was one of those bright spring days when you forget that the chill of winter is still causing pain in your back. I had been in my kitchen since 7, drinking lukewarm coffee and mentally listing all the things I needed to pack. After 23 years in the same location, my lease was about to expire, and I was finally downsizing. Letting go of a house where memories were clung to every aged cabinet handle and chipped corner wasn't easy, but I was prepared. My boss, Miriam, called to check on the move and casually offered to send her son over to help. So I said yes before giving it much thought because I knew of Jason. The company had offered a moving stipend, which helped, but it didn't come with extra hands, and I knew better than to try to lift heavy boxes on my own. I had already pinched something in my shoulder last week from carrying my old printer down to the car. We had previously met at an office holiday function. He gave his mother a new scarf and remained largely silent, but I do recall thinking how striking he was. He exuded the quiet confidence that some men get in their 30s, the kind that doesn't require proof. When Miriam said he would be there by 10, I didn't expect much more than a few courteous greetings and a handshake. He was tall and had the same serene spirit when I opened the door at precisely 9:58. He was wearing faded jeans and a flannel shirt, with his sleeves rolled up and a little tool bag slung over one shoulder. He grinned as I opened the door. He offered his hand once more and added, "I'm Miss Harper Wright," with a genuine smile that wasn't one of those courteous workplace ones. "My name is Jason. You could use a little muscle today, according to my mum." I chuckled and moved aside. "Call me Diane." He entered the room, which was now filled with piles of partially packed boxes, some sealed, some still open with flaps protruding like tiny paper wings. And yes, perhaps I may have underestimated my ability to move a lifetime of clutter by myself. "You've already accomplished a lot, and I've completed everything I mentioned that was simple. What's left are the items I've been putting off, like old photo albums, books, and files." The garage. Jason smiled. We seemed to be in for some nostalgic recollections. He rolled up his sleeves a little higher and started working. I tried not to hover as I indicated what needed to be lifted and packed, but something about him unnerved me. Not negatively, but in a way that made me notice the quiet times between us more than normal. For example, when he gave me a framed picture that had been hidden behind a cabinet, it showed my late husband and I when we originally purchased this home. After giving it a quick glance, Jason handed it to me. "You appear content here," and I nodded. We were. He died 8 years ago, which was a long time ago. Gently, "I'm sorry," he said. "That kind of loss. It never really leaves you, does it?" "No," I said, tracing the frame's edge with my fingers. "Like a second heartbeat, it becomes a part of you." Silently, the moment went by, and we carried on working. But something had changed. We spent the next hour in the garage going through boxes of old tools, paint cans, and other items I hadn't touched in years. He discovered an old wood carving about a project I'd started in my early 40s but never finished. "You made this?" he asked, holding it up. After that, there was a softness in his gaze that I hadn't anticipated, a kind of quiet respect. It was a little uneven and rough, but not too difficult for a newbie like me. I used to enjoy doing manual labor. Life stepped in the way. He took some more time to study it. "You ought to go back to it. You have a good sense of form." Despite being such a minor compliment, it landed deeper than it ought to have. Perhaps it was the way he phrased it. He seemed to truly mean it, as if he had noticed something I hadn't displayed in years, rather than merely attempting to be polite. We had made significant progress by midday. I poured fresh coffee, cooked us both turkey sandwiches, and sat at the little table by the kitchen window, while the living room was mostly empty. I also demanded that he take a break. In an attempt to strike up a discussion, I inquired, What do you do when you're not helping your mom's co-workers move house? He laughed and said, I do freelance design consultation for some architects, primarily on minor interior remodeling projects. Nothing glitzy. I answered, that explains the tool bag. Someone who builds things is in your hands. Jason gave me a brief glance, his face unreadable. I enjoy designing areas where people feel like they belong and are not just utilitarian. I nodded slowly. These days, that is uncommon. For a while, we merely ate quietly, while observing the trees outside being stirred by the wind. I'm not sure what it was about at the time. The silence, the feeling of mutual comprehension, the way he gazed at me with interest rather than sympathy, and then he asked abruptly, was it hard? Leaving the house, I didn't immediately respond. Indeed, but not for the reasons that people believe. It has nothing to do with the walls, the yard, or the floor design. The spirits are to blame. Despite their peaceful nature, they dislike change. He grinned thoughtfully, not in jest. Sometimes a fresh perspective is necessary to reconcile the ghosts. I thought about that statement for a long time after we started packing again. I found myself not wanting the day to end long after he carried the last heavy box into the hallway, even as he was getting ready to leave dust on his shirt and a drop of sweat at his temple. Thank you again, I said as I walked him to the door. Any time, he replied. Actually, would you be okay if I came back tomorrow? He paused. We seemed to have just begun, and I have some time. I felt a stirring sensation in my chest. Perhaps it was appreciation. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. And I would like to say in a hushed voice, I'd like that very much. Leaning against the door, I saw it close behind him, heart fluttering unexpectedly. There were other things changing today besides the boxes. Something was also shifting inside of me. I noticed that I was brushing my hair a bit longer than normal the following morning, and I even applied a gentle rose-tinted lipstick that I hadn't used in months. It felt good to care again, not because I was attempting to impress Jason. At least that's what I told myself. The house seemed to have a strange new energy, as if the air had changed slightly to awaken something that was sleeping inside of me. I nearly burst out laughing when I saw Jason standing on the porch with the same easy smile and a tray of iced coffees in hand at 10:30, a few minutes later than the day before. Thought you might like something cold today, he remarked, presenting one to me. You're spoiling me already, I said, happily taking the drink. If you don't stop, I'll have to put you on fair trade payroll. You feed me, he said. Sandwiches, I even lift objects, as we call it. Before I realized the relocation was actually underway, we began in the bedroom closet, which was the final significant obstacle to overcome. It had boxes of mementos from decades ago, old clothing I hadn't worn, and a drawer full of mismatched scarves I couldn't bring myself to discard. I perched on the edge of the bed, going through a stack of old diaries as Jason took out the bulkier bins. My husband gave me a delicate silver bracelet for our 15th anniversary, which I hadn't seen in years, until I opened a small velvet box I didn't recognize. Jason saw that my breath was stuck in my throat. You all right? I nodded but remained silent for a while. When I turned the bracelet over and read the engraving on the reverse, I noticed that although it felt cool and light in my palm, the memories behind it held a weight I hadn't anticipated. Always us. The year before he passed away, my husband gave me this. I eventually said it, sounding softer than I had planned. Jason sat next to me, not too close, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence. He sounds like he really saw you. He did, I whispered, even when I didn't see myself. We sat there in the quiet for a while. There was no rush, no need to fill the silence. We were going through a difficult time at work, health, and life. Then one night he handed me this bracelet and a quiet look. A man who understood how to make stillness comfortable before saying something that startled me. Guard, I never truly saw my mother like this, you know? It's easy to forget that individuals have layers and that we weren't always the roles we play. I turned to face him because I had a life before me, before job, before becoming a mother. He nodded slowly. Perhaps that's why I enjoy assisting you with moving. There are more than simply boxes. It contains fragments of your past and present selves. I smiled and gave him a box of old records because there was a compassion in his words that lingered on my chest and left me unsure of how to react. This might help you figure out who I was. He chuckled as he flipped through the stack. Mac Fleetwood Mitchell, Joni Carol King. You have good taste, and you believe that I would be the type of lady who would put her music away after I made fun of it. I think you're the kind of woman who saved the most important parts for last, he remarked after giving me a serious look. I wasn't accustomed to being perceived that way anymore, but something about the way he spoke warmed my cheeks, not only as a neighbor or worker, but also as a woman with a lengthy past. We put in a few more hours of work. Every second feels a little more shared and familiar. I briefly lost my balance while I was reaching for a box on the top shelf. Before I could trip, Jason grabbed me by the waist and held me steady. He didn't let go immediately, and I wasn't worried either, he added in a low voice as we briefly faced each other closely enough for me to see the green flecks in his hazel eyes. I'm okay. You don't want to get wounded, I whispered, but in reality, I wasn't entirely certain because there seemed to be something delicate going on. It worried me more than I wanted to admit since it was more than simply physical proximity. It was something deeper and more emotional. Later, as we were having lunch together, I saw that he was observing me. Not in an awkward way, but in a way that gave me a sense of purpose and continued visibility in a society that frequently ignored women like me. Your energy is really serene. Breaking the stillness, I said. He grinned, saying, I try to appear calm on the outside because I overthink everything. He laughed when I responded, That's a good trick. You should teach it to me. I believe that you are stronger than you appear to be. The compliment remained between us, and instead of avoiding it like I usually do, I allowed it to warm me from the inside out. The sun had set by the time he was ready to depart, and golden light was streaming through the blinds. At the door, he stopped and turned back to face me. If you still need assistance, I'll be here tomorrow. I also stated quietly, but not just with the boxes. Jason maintained eye contact with me. His eyes were flickering with something unsaid. I'll see you tomorrow. As the door shut behind him, I stood there in the last of the light, sensing that something had changed once more, a tentative but genuine possibility. The crates were gradually being emptied, but something else was only starting to fill up inside of me. The following day was different. The house, which had previously been overflowing with boxes and the echoes of memories, had begun to feel oddly open on both a physical and emotional level. There was now space for new ideas and thoughts. Jason showed up shortly after 10 with the same gentle knock on the door and the same easy smile. Instead of bringing coffee this time, he carried a little paperback. As I opened the door, he handed me two freshly cooked, still warm croissants from a little cafe close to downtown. Thought you might like these, he said. I stepped aside to let him in and said, Now you're definitely spoiling me. He responded, You've earned it. You've been carrying the burden of this place for a long time. Like old acquaintances, we ate breakfast without a ceremony while standing at the counter. It seemed as though the kitchen, with its fading wallpaper and broken worktops, was rediscovering what it meant to be a home. We next proceeded to the sunroom, where there were only a few boxes remaining, most of them containing used art supplies. Canvases, brushes, and partially used acrylic paint tubes. Jason pulled out a tiny, incomplete landscape while crouching close to one of the crates. The brushwork was expressive, strong, and a tad sloppy. He questioned, "Did you paint this?" I hesitated for a moment before nodding. That was years ago, before things became too raucous. He handled it with care, as if it were important. "It's lovely. Your touch is powerful." I had not touched a brush in over 10 years. Why didn't I shrug when I suddenly felt a deep aching in my chest? I believe I stopped allowing myself to make things solely for me. Life becomes hectic, then tranquil, and somewhere in between, you lose sight of who you were. Jason continued to grasp the artwork while leaning against the door frame. "You ought to begin anew, just for you and no one else." His words fell gently, as to a stone submerged in water. I didn't have to respond since you could see the odd mixture of longing and pain on my face. We moved in a pattern that seemed almost sacred throughout the afternoon. He held me, and we talked about ridiculous childhood injuries and past relationships that hadn't quite worked out. There was no pressure to look good or put on a front, just two people living openly together. Our hands briefly brushed while we were lifting a box together, and neither of us turned away. "You've got paint on your fingers," he observed with a smile. "I was going through the art supplies. It fits you." That short sentence had an impact on me. My eyes were on his face for longer than necessary, but I didn't say anything since I didn't know what to say. I saw the faint specks of freckles on his cheek and the small curvature of his lips as he thought. We later stopped in the backyard for a rest. Jason added, "This place has a quiet kind of beauty, despite the weeds." I grinned and replied, "That's how I feel most days." As the sun started to set, it produced long golden shadows across the grass. I brought out a couple of lemonades, and we sat on the stairs facing the overgrown garden. He gave me a look before saying, "I hope you know you're allowed to bloom again," with an unreadable expression. Something in his voice caused me to breathe a bit too forcefully, as if he could see through the layers I hadn't realized I was still wearing and wasn't just discussing the garden. For a while, we sat quietly drinking lemonade while allowing the wind to caress us. Then, as the sun began to set, I got up and went inside, followed by Jason. I tripped a little on one of the wobbly planks as we returned to the hallway. "You okay?" he murmured in a quiet voice as he reflexively put one arm around my waist to steady me. I nodded, my breath stopping a little at our proximity. He was still holding my waist. My heart thumped louder than I wanted to admit, but neither of us backed off. I believe I started and stopped because I forgot what it's like to be held. The room felt heavy then, not with fear or perplexity, but with the weight of unspoken truths, with the weight of feeling that had quietly gathered between us in the days of boxes and old stories. Jason's eyes searched mine. "You deserve both, and not just in passing. We haven't crossed any lines yet." Not yet, but as he released his grip, there was something in the way his fingers remained, the way he glanced at me before leaving with his suitcase. He whispered, "I'll be back tomorrow." I know I said, standing in the doorway as he left into the dark evening, "I'll be here." I remained there for a while after the door clicked shut. With everything left unsaid, the air remains heated. Something had opened within of me. It was a silent, looming pain I hadn't experienced in years, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared of it. The move's last day arrived earlier than I had anticipated. The sun was already high when Jason arrived, and the few boxes that remained were primarily emotional items that I hadn't had the courage to touch. His clothing is little crumpled, but he still has a relaxed smile. This time, he only brought himself and no coffee or pastries, and for some reason, it seemed plenty. He greeted, "Morning," as he entered the room. "Morning," I said, my voice a little kinder than I had anticipated. He nodded and asked, "You ready for the last round?" But neither of us immediately approached the box stack. Rather, we drifted back to the kitchen as though we needed one last quiet moment before the burden of saying goodbye could sink in. We didn't talk much, and it wasn't awkward. It seemed as though everything we hadn't dared to speak out loud was contained in the air surrounding us. We eventually made our way back to the living room after a short while, and I pointed to a box by the window. I haven't opened those for years, but they are filled with old letters from friends, my spouse, and even myself when I was younger. Jason squatted next to it, tracing the edge with his finger. Letters are machines of time. I smiled quietly and added, "Have you ever read one and constantly forgotten what year you're in?" "You're not the same woman who stood in this room a few days ago," he said, looking up at me and then continuing to stare. "No," I said, cocking my head slightly. "No, you've been carrying so much in silence, but now it's like you're letting yourself exhale," he said quietly. He seemed to have seen my heart's gradual development without uttering a word until now, and I blinked in amazement at how accurate that felt. Jason inhaled deeply. He didn't go into detail, but I didn't rush him. I simply listened. I hadn't anticipated this to happen. He added that I had assumed I was assisting my mom's coworker with a few boxes when I met you, and you weren't what I had anticipated. I took a slow gulp. "What did you anticipate?" "I don't know. Maybe someone would be appreciative or kind, but you're more than that. You're intelligent, humorous, strong, and attractive in a way that causes people to slow down without even realizing it." Heat began to bloom in my chest and radiate outward. It had been years since I had heard someone speak to me in such a way, not only with flattery, but also with clarity and truth. I moved towards him, my fingers grazing a box's side. What should we do with this at this point? He stared at me for a long time without saying anything. "Whatever it is, we just give it space to exist without hurrying or labeling it." I nodded, and that felt appropriate. Later, when he loaded the last few boxes into my car, I saw him stack them carefully, using delicate hands despite their weight. He was not only shifting items, rather, he was treating them with respect, as though he realized they were more than just boxes, but rather holding fragments of a life lived. After we were done, we gathered beside the exposed trunk. The air was silent and the street was quiet. He aced me and turned to two. He inquired, "Maybe," and I replied, "Maybe not." But he grinned. Then his lips formed a tiny, sincere curve. "If I asked to meet you again, would that seem strange? Only you and I, no boxes, no heavy lifting." My heart, which had been wary and huddled in on itself, opened little further. "No," I replied. "It wouldn't be strange at all." He then leant in to place his forehead against mine, but not to kiss me. There was nothing more intimate that could have occurred. Silently grounded. "Indeed, I'll call you. I'll be waiting." He caressed a lock of hair off my cheek as he withdrew. I muttered. The quiet was broken by the gentle clink of his keys as he gently walked away. And I stood there with the sun beaming heartily over my shoulders as he turned the corner. I found my old paintbrushes again, put them on the table, and stared at a blank canvas that night in my new place, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the scent of cardboard and lavender from a diffuser I had just plugged in. For the first time in years, I didn't feel stuck. I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, not because someone had arrived and made me feel whole, but because he reminded me that I already was, and that perhaps, on the other side of saying goodbye, Something lovely was starting anew.